and Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Honor
and Chris Ramos.
We have a special guest in the house tonight. We have...
Hello, it's Benjamin. I don't know what else you want to say. I'm here. I'm happy to talk.
Yes, we go way back, and we are happy to have another nerd on the podcast and another reader. Tonight's episode, we are talking about the new Teen Titans, the Marv, Wolfman, and George Perez run. But before we get into that, Ben, how did you start reading comics?
So I got into comics. I've always been sort of like a superhero, comic hero fan. Like as a kid, I grew up on like the cartoons. Like when I was a kid, early 2000s was the era of like the Justice League and Teen Titans cartoons,
Yep.
X-Men Evolution, like that era.
Oh yeah, those were good times.
Yeah. So that was sort of like what I grew up on. And so I always like had an interest in the characters, and I never really like dove into the actual books until a little bit later in life. And especially in the past year, as I've been in like COVID quarantine with not much to do, I like started really diving into reading comics. And Teen Titans was always just one of my favorite franchises. So I kind of started there. So this is kind of like where I started. So this is the beginning of my knowledge.
Excellent.
I think that's always a good point to jump into is say, where was your sort of first introduction to either a team or a single hero or a cosmic hero or, ground-based hero? Because usually the people kind of follow that a little bit. Like I've talked to a lot that say, I started off with a team like JLA, and then they're always looking for teams. It's like that's kind of what they like is multiple characters doing the
before
same
you split
thing.
off into like a solo series.
Yeah, right. Like Daredevil or something like that.
Sure. So we both grew up on the Teen Titans cartoon that came around the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. How was reading the comics from this era different than watching the show? Like, what was your reactions when you started reading this for the first time?
So I actually read the 2000 series first, the Jeff Johns Teen Titans. And then I went backwards and came back to this. And I think I was surprised by how in some places serious the story is. It's still very 80s and campy in moments, but the villains are truly threatening.
Yes.
And the inter-team emotional human drama is very real too. So I was kind of surprised because the show has more of that anime inspiration, right? And it's a lot of kicking and punching, and then the quirks that they added, like Starfire's the way that she talks strange.
Yes.
Or
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more jokes, and this
Right. Yeah. When I was reading their jokes and stuff, my I guess touching on the comic on this run, Beast Boy's like, oh, I use humor to disguise my depression. And I'll mention that again, but I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know that. He was so sad.
Yeah, and Starfire in the show.
Very repressed.
In the show, Starfire is super she's ooh, hearts and very
hearts and unicorns.
Anime
let's go
girl.
get food.
Yeah, she feels more like a Powerpuff Girl idea.
Yes.
And then, they have Cyborg doing the booyah and all that.
Yeah,
too. So,
he never says booyah.
The booyah. Yeah. and this run, you have Starfire being from my planet, we express whatever we feel. And I'm mad at this person, so I'm going to kill them. And they're like, you can't kill.
Yeah.
And she's just why not?
Right.
And that's a much more serious in some ways than the show. But
Yes.
Yeah, and, in the show too, and that's one thing that I like when you get into comics of the characters themselves is the writer Marv Wolfman said they didn't really realize that the Titans would make it past a year.
He didn't think he'd make it past the first six issues.
Yeah, DC was having trouble just sort of finding something that sticks. And usually in the comic book world, when they are trying to find a new run, just like now when they're doing Netflix shows and things, they just try it and that didn't stick. Try this, that didn't stick. So they just threw artists and writers together and said, I don't know, you can have a run with these characters. No one's using them right now. And I think the Teen Titans comic shows a lot more of their background and character development, obviously, than the cartoon or anything else would, just because they usually don't spend a lot of time on those kinds of things. They just get caught up on the episodes. But I think Marv really approached it as, these are characters, you already know Robin, you already know Wally West, Kid Flash, and you already know uh, who else? Beast Boy, I guess, from Doom Patrol and things like that. But they're really trying to say this is where they are in their life right now.
Yes.
Just because you knew Robin before, because Robin
Right.
at this time had been out for 40 years in the comics.
Right.
So
And like the Teen Titans existed before this run.
Yes.
They just
name-
weren't treated as seriously, I think. It was just sidekick based.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the 60s, 70s run that I haven't read all of it, but I've like read some of it. It's like they're answering fan mail from like kids who are like, I'm being bullied at school. Can you help? And it was like that kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Okay, right. That's a good place to start, but you can't get into any major issues.
Yeah. Well, and the other cool thing is, I'm a big Batman fan. Everyone knows that. So Robin kind of being taken out of his element a little bit shows that he had been in Batman's shadow, pun intended, I guess, for a long time. And, he has some straight up skills, detective skills. And, he's obviously fighting skills, acrobatic skills, electronics. And everyone else starts showing what they can contribute to a team. And before you know it, this team almost became sort of like the perfect storm. And I think
Yes.
Marv Wolfman picked up on that right away of just like, everyone brings their own
Something unique to the table.
yeah, their own
expertise.
shtick, I guess.
Mhm.
But and there's 3 boys and 3 girls, and they kind of like had them. One is way up, like Cyborg is way out from Robin,
Yeah.
and then like Beast Boy's in the middle, and then like Raven is way out from Wonder Girl, and then, and then now you've got Starfire. So it was a really good dynamic, I think, and it shows right away within 5 issues. It shows right away.
So I guess, is this your first encounter with the Teen Titans or reading the Teen Titans?
Yeah, I haven't read an entire Teen Titans story beyond just maybe some snippets here and there that you run into through the years, because unlike you guys, I've been reading comics for 32 years.
Old man.
so there's a lot of storylines that I've touched on.
That's
a
all right.
little bit
You're
here.
just your wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, but we are talking about on the podcast. We always talk about collected editions, hardcover editions, omnibus, and that's exactly what this is. It takes roughly 2 years of the Teen Titans and puts it into one easy to read, straightforward volume. And just imagine, reading 2 issues here and then 1 there and 2 issues there. You don't really get the feel, right? Like
yes,
you
it would be hard reading this individually, and especially if you missed an issue.
Just to randomly jump in and read them, and like you would piece together your own stories for these characters. And it's cool that they've had a chance to build it in their own timeline and just say, we're not going to just blast out everyone's origin story right away, which I think was an old trope. Like they get a new character and they're like, here's the origin story. And that's the issue 1 is like everything
all
about
origin,
the person.
blah, blah, blah.
This one, they just throw them right in.
So I do
just
like
jump
that they
in.
sprinkle it out. And then at the end of, this omnibus collects issues 1 through 16. And then it collects, how do they call it? The individual issues.
Yeah, like just 4 of them.
Yeah,
right?
4
Like
of
one
them. It's Changeling or Beast Boy, Cyborg, Raven, and Starfire.
Yeah, because those were the newer characters that were not around before.
So that was a good way. Like, if you enjoyed like some of their origin stories that were told in like a page or 2 of each along the way, you can go and read these and flesh out the character and understand what they're all about.
Now, for most people, to kind of place this in the timeline of DC, this is pre-crisis.
Yeah, it was, I think, just going to happen.
So in DC Comics, one of the biggest events that they've ever done is called Crisis on Infinite Earths. And
same team.
Same team, writing and artist team. But what they did was they took every storyline, and this is just like a gross generalization, so Ben and everyone jump in if you want, but they took every storyline that was out there because Batman and Superman and Supergirl and everyone and Wonder Woman, they had 40, 50 years of comics written. And for them to introduce someone like Wonder Girl or introduce someone who's younger or like Superboy, everyone was like, how is Superboy in the comics when Superman is still in the comics? And this is the younger version of Superman. And how is this happening? And why is Batman not aging after 50 years?
Yeah.
So what they did was they just took everyone together and they roughly burned up a lot of different worlds in the DC universe. And they left one world and said, this is the stories now. And so all these old characters kind of got shuffled. And part of that was the original Flash, Barry Allen, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, changed. I don't do spoiler, but it changed. So then Wally West, who's in this comic
Before
as Kid Flash, became the Flash.
Yeah.
So it was cool. They had characters change their role. They had storylines starting new, and they had long-running comics like this getting a fresh jumping point.
Right.
You know?
So after volume 2 of the New Teen Titans, then Crisis happened.
Oh, all right.
So they had a little time to establish,
like 30
and then
issues or something.
Yeah.
Like that?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay.
So that happened. Crisis happened in from 1985 to 1986.
And it
So-
really helped DC at the
April,
time,
March,
like
yeah.
really helped them because it made it just a clear point for most readers to say, you know, this is still the Superman, you know, but it's just, this is the world he's in now. And this is what the new world looks like.
Yep. And now they use Crisis for cliche.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, that's we're
Every
getting
couple of
bored.
years.
Things are getting
Yeah.
stale. Whoop.
Yeah. DC's like, how do we kind of backtrack a little bit? Make a Crisis.
Crisis. Crisis.
Tear it up. Tear it up.
Yep.
Every time.
But we're gonna focus before that in the first volume. So, where do you guys want to start?
Well, I mean, I think it's at the beginning of every omnibus, they always have like a prologue or a written synopsis from the writer. And Marv Wolfman wrote one, and sometimes I don't read them. I caution people because they give away parts of
Sometimes,
the Omni. Sometimes,
Sure.
so it's like I always want to read like at least half the Omni, and then I go back and read the
Okay.
introduction, because it's hard for anyone to say, you know, these stories were written 40 years ago, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna, you know, just tell the spoiler. Well, there's always new readers, and that's
Yeah.
why. So,
Mhm.
but I thought it was interesting that he wrote that they didn't really know how far they were going to get and how well it was going to sell,
Yeah.
and so he kind of says, I think on issue 8, or issue 6 is when it really picked up.
Yes.
So they needed a few issues, but actually going from issue 1 through 6 isn't that bad.
No, it definitely establishes the characters. It's not even Robin who's gathering the team. It's
Mhm.
Raven that gathers the team.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, so I was like, "What?" It's like from the guy who watches the cartoons growing up all his life, I was like, "Whoa, okay."
I know.
Sure.
Robin's the leader. No, Robin.
No, Robin's not the like Raven. Raven's the one's like there's this prophecy, there's this epic doom coming, and I gotta gather a team together. Let's see who I can find. Oh, hey, Robin. Let's go find a team. So they're putting together this team.
And the team starts off with gathering up a bunch of teenagers because Raven needs their help, and somehow she's identified them as like, we can do this together. We don't need to
Yep.
grab someone else. And I think they even mention, which is funny because issue 6 is when they said it takes off, but issue 5 is when they bring in the JLA, and that was
Yeah.
an old school like trick, is to like, comics not doing so well, let's bring in
Bring in-
some heavy hitters so
Yeah.
that people see on the shelf like, what is Superman doing with the Teen Titans? And it didn't really work because they were only there that one issue,
Yep.
and then after that
Yep.
they don't really come back.
No.
Am I right with it?
Yeah, they don't.
Because they didn't need them,
Exactly.
which is awesome, to
awesome.
say.
Yeah, to see they can stand on their own 2 feet and be successful.
So Ben, why don't you take us through each character?
Yes.
I can do that.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things like what you just said that strikes me about this, and I haven't read a ton of like pre-crisis DC. I've read a lot of the newer DC, but just something that Wolfman and Perez did that I don't does not happen a ton now. I don't know about at the time, but is they established like new characters, original characters, and original storylines that were not connected to Batman or Superman.
That's
like
true.
nowadays, that's very rare.
Yeah.
And you do have Robin, obviously, who comes from the Batman mythos. But I even wrote down, I was reading, there's a quote where Robin says one time, he's like, it's so cool being part of a team where Robin isn't always preceded by Batman and like that's like part of the
Yeah.
story.
You nailed
He's
it.
like,
Yeah.
And Robin hardly ever mentions him. Like,
Yeah,
ever,
I think
which is
it's
cool.
very
And
rare
no one
that
else really
Batman
does.
comes up. Yeah, he's like, oh yeah, we did some things.
and that's the part of the TV show that I think actually does come from here, because in the TV show there's no connection to the Batman.
Yeah.
mythos.
Yeah, no.
Like everyone kind of knows that
Yeah.
Robin is like a sidekick, but he's not really a sidekick here. He's the leader in a
Mhm.
lot of ways.
Sure.
Um,
And this is before Robin became Nightwing as well.
Yes.
So we do get to see some of those little tidbits here and there of him growing up and maturing as a leader. I think that was one of the big things in this book was Robin knows he's outpowered most of the time,
Mhm.
but he has all the leadership skills to bring the team together and make them
Well,
be successful.
and there is a part in here where Wonder Girl's apartment was broken into.
yeah, yep.
And everyone's like, who did this? Where did they? And then they don't know what to do.
Yep.
And the whole team is lost. And they look over and like Robin's dusting for prints. And it's like,
oh yeah, I
it's
just
like-
carry around this in my utility belt.
and he is like, it just is so into his character because it's like he thinks so baseline, like detective, like I'm gonna figure this out. And everyone else just sort of is in shock. Like
mhm.
there isn't an enemy for them to power blast.
Yeah.
So then they're like, who could have done this? And Robin's like, I'm gonna find out.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Old
school.
Yeah. And so
Yeah, I think like the whole story, especially these first few issues, is all about being allowed to mature and grow up, because you have Robin like, I just like that it's a slow burn though. They like
Mhm.
make
Yeah.
you wait for it. Like he does
Yeah.
become Nightwing, but that's like later.
like
Mhm.
much later. Like,
After Crisis, it's like, probably in volume 3 or 4, but it's so you have Robin and he, tells Raven, like, why do you want me on this team? I don't have any superpowers. How am I gonna be helpful? And she's like, I need someone who can bring a team together, someone who has the personality to lead, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a huge
Inspire.
Nightwing fan.
Inspire.
A huge
Yes.
Nightwing fan, and Nightwing's like one of the most popular characters in DC nowadays. And Nightwing only happened because of this, probably, like his-
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to say it, because Nightwing wouldn't have happened if people weren't asking for Robin to do more.
yeah.
Yeah.
And once he got out of that, and then of course gets into death in the family and things like that, but once this Robin showed that he could actually grow up,
Mhm.
that I think led to a lot of characters growing up
Yeah.
in a way,
Mhm.
whether they grew up physically or if they just said, you know what, I'm going to be my own person now, like my
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have, now you have a lot of Robins, right? We've had Jason and we've had Tim and all these other
Damien
characters.
and
Yeah, and Stephanie and Carrie. But like at this point, when issue 1 of this came out, like Robin was just a sidekick.
Mhm.
For he'd been around for longer
Yep.
than half of the Justice League, but he was just a sidekick basically. And so
Yes.
like this,
He didn't get treated seriously. till
Yeah.
now.
And
with
so
the same costume.
with the same costume, yeah, with
He
the same
has not
costume.
changed his
Yeah,
costume.
Not quite yet.
5 decades.
So I guess a brief overview of the other characters that Raven. So like you said, Raven brings everyone together and says she has a purpose for all of them. And they sort of assume going into it that you kind of know who Wally is and that you kind of know who Donna are, because they were in
Yep.
the first Teen Titans series.
And Kid Flash was just super popular anyway.
Yeah, he was
Flash
around
is
during the
always-
Silver Age Titans too.
Yeah, Flash has always been a popular.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's your elevator pitch on Wonder Girl?
I told Andrew this like a
It's like,
year ago when I was
explain her
reading
now.
this. Like I was like, I could go on a rant about Wonder Girl.
Okay,
So,
you got 2 minutes.
yes, no, I can do it in 60 seconds.
Okay.
So Wonder Girl is DC needs to do her justice. Donna Troy has been around since the Silver Age Teen Titans, and they've just never really known what to do with her, because originally there was a character called Wonder Girl, which was just the younger version of Diana.
Yep.
And they told that for a while, and there was never really like a drastic shift where now she was a different character. They just like suddenly showed them appearing together on the page, and everyone's like, oh wait, so is this a sidekick? Is
Yeah.
this like time travel? What's happening? And eventually in this series now, we see the red costume that she had changed into in the 70s. And, eventually she becomes Troya, and then she becomes Donna Troy, but she has gone through more retcons than any other comic book character in DC. Like her origin story changed during Crisis, and then every other Crisis following, where she was like a clone of Wonder Woman, and then she was her sister, and then she had never met Wonder Woman. And so all in this Wolfman Perez series, later down the line, you have her meeting Wonder Woman for the first time, even though here she's like a clone, or I don't remember where she is.
Yeah,
right
I didn't
now,
know if it was like a daughter or a sister or
she's
like
been
a relative
all of
or
them.
something. Exactly.
And then in the New 52, like later she was like a villain, and she's just been through a lot. But in this particular story, in these like first dozen issues, like she and Wally and Dick are like best friends.
Yes.
And any future series that I've read that like harks back to this, there's always that like emotional pull where you're like, they're best friends, they've been through a lot together.
A lot of camaraderie.
They've known each other since they were like hypothetically, 13, 14, however old they were when they first became sidekicks. And watching them, just like with Robin, you get to watch them grow up into adulthood together, where then, getting married or having jobs, like having kids, becoming part of the Justice League.
It all stems from this.
It all stems from this.
And some of that is a writing strategy where, the comic book at the time, they were trying to really connect to younger readers in general. So they were coming up with just kid versions of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then the easy way to do that is just to say, well, this is Superboy, and this is Supergirl, and this is, the younger version of all of your favorite characters. Because I've always talked about it. I've explained it to people in the past when they say, what's the big difference between readers in the 40s and 50s and then readers in like the 60s and 70s. And, it's the same thing that's happening to any medium anywhere. People who have watched the Harry Potter movies when they were Harry Potter's age are no longer Harry Potter's age. Right. So then they have to figure out like, how do I connect to these people? Well, great. We come out with Fantastic Beasts. Right. So then for comic books, they said, the people who grew up with Superman and Batman in the 40s and the 50s, and who grew up with Captain America and everyone else in the 40s and 50s, here we are in 1980. So, if they're still reading, they are 50 years old. So then they're like,
that's hard.
All right.
Blowing.
Yeah. So they're like, all right. So you guys are still connected to, Green Lantern and the Flash. So now we have to bring in new readers. But for them just to say, well, here's a younger Wonder Woman, people are like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. And then some time goes by, and then I think people wait, what? They think it's cool at first. And then when they see it in the same timeline, in the same structure, in the same city, and they're like, how are they standing next to each other? Then you start getting into that sort of weirdness, right? Yeah. But that's also just the fear of coming up with brand new characters.
Sure.
And Andrew and I have talked about that if DC just said, listen, we are just going to start totally nothing, and we're just going to build up brand new characters that you've never seen before. Part of that would be people saying, gosh, you can't get rid of
the legacy.
Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. You just can't. Like, how could you say there's no more Green Lantern? But then they have to reinvent themselves. And instead of reinventing, I think this Marv Wolfman, he a few times writes as if you are able to handle this story. You know? That's what got me, because I was reading it like if I was 10 years old. Like, all right, this is probably a good little like gateway thing, being 10 to 13 years old. But then they really handle, I even wrote it down. I'm reading it, like deaths are really taken to heart, and like, tragedy, and their backstories are, they're another like old trope in comics is to constantly have a character bring up one thing all the
Yes.
time.
Yep.
You know, like
That was Cyborg.
yeah, like Cyborg's like, I Cyborg. I am not totally human. I am not.
I
It's
hate
like-
my dad.
Yeah, it's like we get it. You don't have to constantly remind us. You know,
It takes a while for him to drop that, but
yeah, like I understand at the
sure he knows
beginning
it.
of an issue to just sort of remind people, like, hey, by the way, I'm Cyborg and I hate my dad.
Yep.
But I just like that they didn't really do that very much. And you know, when they are dating or breaking up, or when they they fall in love because they're in their teens and they're like, yeah, this is the girl. It kind of wears on them for a few issues, and then they kind of let it fizzle, right? Like they don't keep bringing it up, but you can feel the emotion, like they are trying to live a normal life and be superheroes, but they hardly show them in normal life, and then when they do, it's pretty cool. Like when they were in the Grand Canyon, just sort of chilling out.
Yeah,
That was a really cool part.
And I like that in this story, like you have Wolfman and Perez who wrote this, and they kept writing together. And Wolfman wrote this entire series until it ended for like in 1996.
And he wrote like tons of other things too.
while he was writing other
he didn't
things,
just do that.
writing
yeah.
Batman and Crisis and all these other things. But what I like about it is that there are so many things where when something happens in an issue, it affects the team, so that 20 issues down the road, like it matters. Like the things that happen matters. And that's something that, can get annoying about the serial nature of comics sometimes, is when you read something and you're like, this person died, or like this happened, or this person broke up. And then a few issues later, it's like, it never happened. Because oh, they're still dating now, or this person's not actually dead. But in this, there's a lot of things that happen, like whether it's human stuff like breakups or like fights that people have, that like later down the road you see like, oh, they really did fight, because you see now they're acting cold towards each other, or like
everything matters.
Yeah, like it's mapped
and connected
out
together.
And that's what I think, that's just a testament to good writing, really. And the fact that they were able to stay on the story for so many years is that they could like, build on these characters. And unlike some team books, like the team is the same. Like it takes a long time before new characters are introduced to the team.
Yeah. Well, and you always want, good writing and good characters to be in character, which sounds funny. People are like, well, of course that's
everybody's biggest grope. Well,
it's
is
really
when they're
hard.
not in character and they're like, they would never do that.
It's really hard because, people who are just, Robin, he is the analytical one. So he'll think something through, where Flash or something, they'll just run in, or they'll say, well, I'll be right back and I'll get it. And
I'll do recon. Don't worry about it. Nothing bad will happen on the other side.
Yeah. I've already checked this whole building twice. And it is a really good way to write, is that when they say, like there was a part where Starfire, Hawkman appeared, and Starfire is like, hey, that's a Thanagarian. And like, she recognizes him.
Yeah.
And it's cool that, they worked that into the writing, because she should recognize him.
Right.
Yeah, they're both from space. They're both aliens.
She's from a different planet. He's from a different planet. Their species know each other. Like she should say something.
Yeah.
And that's when I think readers get angry with comic books, is when they're like, what do you mean this is the first time they've met?
Yeah.
Right? And that was the same thing.
I'll just walk into a bar and just say, hey, who are you?
Yeah.
And it is a fun way that they've connected to the cartoon later on, is that Starfire and Donna Troy are friends, and Cyborg and Beast Boy are friends. And, Robin sort of feels like he has to remind people, like, there's a few times where he's like, just wait. We don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah. Raven, why are we here?
Yeah. Like he is like us. Like, what is happening now?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. He's like the voice of the reader.
Down,
yeah.
Can we talk about this? Nope. Okay. Sorry. We got to go.
and then there's characters like Cyborg and Starfire, where they have so much power, like incredible amounts of power, but they are holding themselves back because they don't like their power. And that's just another great way to write a character too, is just to say, you are overly powerful, but or Raven, when she uses her powers, she's scared she's going to let go.
Yep.
And she's like, part into the dark dimension. So if she lets go, it's like everyone's in trouble.
Trigon is not Trigon.
Trigon, yeah.
Trigon is my father, but I'm not going to tell you that for like 5 issues.
Yeah.
10 issues.
Now, Andrew, you said your favorites was the Doom Patrol.
Well, other than the Teen Titans, yes, that was my favorite.
Well, the issues
arc.
in here.
That was my favorite
issue.
arc. I will say that. I have a lot of respect for that legacy of the Doom Patrol, and to know that coming into this as kind of an avid reader and follower of it, that most of the Doom Patrol were dead. So that crushed my hopes and dreams. So I was like mind blown, and but it was really cool. It gave some interesting plot lines for this team to kind of help their fellow teammate, Beast Boy, or as in the comics they call him Changeling. Boring. That's such a boring name, Changeling.
But they call him Changeling here because he wants to stop being a Beast Boy.
And I'm like, okay, dude.
He's a teenager. He doesn't want to be a boy anymore.
I guess.
It didn't stick.
That's why.
Yeah.
That's why at the end here, not to cut you off, but there's a drawing that shows Robin, and it says Robin, instead of Robin the Boy Wonder, it says Robin the Teen Wonder.
I didn't even notice that. I'm like,
I was like, what?
I'm not a kid anymore.
Yeah. It's always been Robin
Even
the
though he's
Boy
wearing
Wonder.
those shorts, but
Yeah. And Cyborg calls him short pants, right? All the time.
But so I really appreciate that. But I do appreciate how how the stories are mapped out, that every character gets like their spotlight story of like Raven and her father Trigon. I have to say my O's. They follow that story, which it kind of then sets up, okay, we're going to go follow like the Doom Patrol in one arc. We're going to go to Wonder Girl and the Greek gods and see how that ties in with her mythology, and how those kind of clash against each other, especially. And that's what also was kind of smart. Starfire and Cyborg both have, and kind of Raven for the most part, have all very different perspectives they bring into these existing characters. So they give that new reader feel, or new character feel that, like we were talking about, Starfire acts on her emotions a lot more than the other characters, or she wants to go farther than they'll let her. And they're like, no, you got to reel it in a little bit. Or, hey, let's get it. I'm going to give you some, Wonder Girl's like, I'm going to give you some relationship advice before you start going dating other randos.
Yeah.
Things like that they would never think of. Or like Cyborg's like, why are we doing it that way? That doesn't seem right. I don't want to go to my dad for help, because even though he's one of the smartest scientists on the earth, I'd hate my dad. So we're going to I could still sneak into his lab. It's fine. I just don't want to involve him.
Now, Ben, I know your favorite character is Raven.
Yes, my favorite is Raven.
She's like the standout star in this, actually.
Yeah.
She really, really is like, comes out.
Yeah.
It's a great character arc.
And Raven's changed over the years, but I really like in this how she's very consistent, going back to what you said about keeping the characters in character. She has a whole big thing that's not necessarily so much true if you've only seen like the Titans TV show or the cartoon.
Yeah, I would say she's drastically different than the cartoon.
In this, she feels a little bit more
reserved.
Yeah, solemn, reserved, and she has a really big thing about pacifism. So she grew up in this culture with these people who had such a strong commitment to nonviolence that they won't even try to stop the demon from destroying the world. Yeah. And so that's like, she grew up with this, and you see that play out time and time again. And over time, and she's like the opposite of Starfire, right? Because Starfire's like, if I'm mad at
very
someone,
aggro.
I'm going to attack them. Because
Yeah.
on my culture, we don't like repress our emotions. It's, if you have an emotion, you share it. That's just her culture. Whereas Raven's like the complete opposite, where it's like, you do everything to keep everything inside so that you don't cause harm.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, how they wrote these new characters in a way that they filled different personality sort of moments.
Well, and they also write her almost like you are reading, and then you see a big surge of power, and you're like, whoa, she is powerful. And then you read a couple more issues, and then you're like, whoa, she's like really, really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And then you read a few more issues, and you're like, she could level this whole like city if she wanted to. And once you realize just actually how powerful she is, again, it's kind of like you want her to be that easy out. Like, oh, the team's really struggling. Like, why don't you get in there and do your thing and put everyone to sleep or whatever.
Right.
And that's just, that kind of gets back into that broken Superman mentality of like, if Superman is teaming up with someone who is lesser powered, you're just like, oh, he's going to do all the heavy lifting,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But they never really let her do that because she still finds value in everyone else in the team, and the
Yes.
writers still find storylines that make everyone else needed. Like they do things that only Kid Flash could handle.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and they do things that only Robin can figure out, and they question Robin every once in a while too. Like that one time where he's like, Beast Boy was in a trap, and he's like, what animal do you think I turned into? And Robin's like, oh, let me think about this. And he had to figure it out and be the detective.
The only thing that I didn't like, or I question a little bit about some of the dialogue with Raven, was Cyborg kept calling her a witch. And I'm like, is she a witch? I feel that's not the right word for it, but oh man, I guess we're going to go with it. It's a thing because you don't know what else to like call her for a nickname or whatever.
Well, and what she's doing is magic, but like I guess if I was
traditional magic
to put myself into this story for them, when they think of magic, they know Zatanna because Zatanna is the magic user on the Justice League right now, and so that's like,
and she's in that weird costume.
Yeah, and she's like
very
she's
80s
casting spells, so that's like magic.
Yes.
And Raven's more like she explains one time they're like, oh, are you a telepath? And she's like, no, I'm an empath.
And nobody's really heard of that.
Yeah, everyone's like, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
and it is she absorbs emotions and pain and suffering, and she can absorb a lot, right? But if someone's going to die, that was almost like her stopping point. She's like, I can't absorb this much pain, right? So she even found her limits, and that again is another way to write of just like, we're going to set everyone's limit. Like, here's the bar. This is as much as they can do. And then of course, what do you do as a writer? You push past that and you make them all. And that was the other thing too. A lot of them came to the team as already like superheroes, bona fide superheroes. And right away they didn't have to learn like
how to use their powers.
Yeah, and they didn't have to learn how to work together, and they all kind of
took it for granted a little bit,
figured it out. Yeah.
They figured it out real fast.
And that was cool that there wasn't like an extended training period. It was just like we could just jump right in. Let's just get to it.
Sure.
I mean,
kind of hits the ground running.
I mean, Robin in the cartoon, doesn't he like train a lot of them?
I do recall that.
He's always yelling at them all.
Well, because they're a little bit more actually like kids, like teenagers.
Yeah.
And
the age of these guys, they're going into college.
Yeah, Wally's like a freshman in college, and Dick like dropped out of college. So they're
That's why Dick's in the team, because Batman's like pissed off at
him. He mentions that he's like, Batman's mad at me for dropping out of college.
There's Batman's like,
real life problems here.
Yeah, so they're like 17, 18, 19, even 20 for like Cyborg maybe. But so they're like older teenagers, but you can tell that they're still young.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess what were some spotlight issues for you guys, or spotlight moments that happened? I'll while you're figuring that out, I'll talk about mine. Mine was early on in issue, I believe it was issue 2, when they were dealing with Deathstroke, or the Terminator's son.
Mm-hmm.
That was such a right off the bat, like emotional and impactful and action-packed issue that I was like, whoa, this is way different than any of the Teen Titan cartoons or even the movies that I've ever seen. We get to learn about the first Ravager, which was Grant Wilson, Slade's son, before he became Deathstroke. And the Hive like talks about, we're trying to hire a father, but they don't call him his father yet because he doesn't know. His son doesn't even know that's his father. But he always looked up to him. Up to the character, I guess, the characterization or the myth of Deathstroke. And he says, we can make you better than Deathstroke. Deathstroke only uses 90% of his brain, but we're going to make you use 100%. You will be stronger than him. He's like, cool, I get to be like my idol, and then I will go fight the Titans, because the Titans what was it? They were talking to his girlfriend, and he was kind of like battering her around and giving her a hard, not being abusive, but being hard on his girlfriend. So he's like, oh, well, because you're disrupting my relationship, I'm going to go attack the Titans and I'm going to kill them. And you're like, whoa, okay, dude, you're kind of extreme, but they deal with him. And, but the Titans don't kill him, and they don't really even stop him so much. Deathstroke finds out that his son is going after the Titans, and he's like, well, I'm going to go help him out. And so they kind of have this buddy cop moment for a little bit. It's like, yeah, we're going to team up. We're going to do this. But then they find out that the Ravager, he uses his powers are, he burns through them so fast that his body can't keep up. And, Deathstroke's like, don't use your powers that much, which that didn't make sense to me because he just is. But I'm like, whatever. So he's like, don't use your powers so much. But he does. He's a young kid still. He's like, whatever. Screw you, Dad. Screw you, Deathstroke. And he does stop the team, but his body withers away and dies. And so Deathstroke's like, this can never happen again. I'm going to absorb my son's hit out on the Titans. I'm going to make sure I finish him off. And he becomes one of the great legacy villains of the Titans.
Yeah, and they really stretch that out too. He doesn't just come back the next issue.
No, he did.
That's great. That's great.
And that was the first one that came to my head too. Was that moment, because it's such a good origin story, because you have Deathstroke, who's still a very popular character and has always kind of been seen as, he's been a Batman villain, he's been a Green Arrow villain, but he's been a Teen Titans villain from the beginning. And you see him I hate the Titans, but this is why. Because at the beginning, you see they offer the contract to him. They're like, we want you to kill the Teen Titans. And he was like, I'm a contract killer. I only do this for money. So you either pay me or I'm not going to do it. Yep. And they're like, well, grumble. And so he walks away. And so for him, it's like, this is just a job, but now you've made it personal. Yes. And so now for the next 40 years, I'm going to hate the Teen Titans.
Yes. Darn you, Teen Titans.
Yeah. And the fact that, you talked about earlier how they weren't sure if this series was going to take off. Yeah. And in the first 6 issues, they introduce Trigon, sort of. They hint at Trigon until they actually fight him. Mm-hmm. They have Deathstroke, they have the Hive, they have the Fearsome Five. They have all these villains.
They have the JLA just because.
And all of these characters were introduced in a few months period by these writers, and they're still all characters that are used over and over again. Yeah, and that's today. They have a real origin story here, which I think is really cool.
So my favorite issue is the New Teen Titans number 20. I want to talk about 2 things, though. One of them is almost at the end of every few issues, they did an epilogue. I thought that was really, really cool because an epilogue is such a good trick. It's like a after credits scene, know? And in most
I don't really see it happen anymore.
No, it's it was such a good wrap up. And sometimes the issues, just like you were talking about with Deathstroke, that really closed that arc. This happened, that happened, this happened, done, right? And then you can come back to that. Nothing was just left weird. People were like, well, that was just out of nowhere. So the epilogues really show sometimes there's 1 or 2 pages where they just sort of wrap up the issue. This is where everyone went. The Teen Titans went back to the tower, and this one's in jail, and this guy's over here. And then you introduce maybe another little villain or something. But the New Teen Titans number 20 is a letter that Wally West is writing to his parents when he's in college, which is really funny because it's called Dear Mom and Dad, and he signs it, P.S. Please send money.
Always, come on.
College student.
It's I'm Kid Flash. And the issue is written from his point of view. So it's he does a little bit of a flashback. He does a little bit of a I couldn't move. I felt this way, or, I wasn't fast enough. And so you get the idea that he's sort of writing this story to his parents, but the issue is also showing these events happening. And it's just a really interesting way to approach a comic book issue because they're not trying to introduce new characters. They're not trying to, shock the reader. They're just saying, here's Wally West in college writing about what he just did last night, which was save the city. And then he's writing it to his parents, which is another cool thing, that he has that connection with his parents. But also in the issue, you see a lot of like Robin, just sort of like how he reacts to just like parties and things, and he's just not part of it.
Yeah.
And then you get
very sheltered.
Yeah. He just doesn't know what to do. And then there's a part where Raven, like, okay, so Kid Flash is fighting the villain, and then the other Teen Titans just sort of show up. But again, they show that the Teen Titans, like, the girls are like, in their PJs and doing their hair, and like, other people are just like eating sandwiches and things. And it is fun to just show them like
the party. Yeah.
not
Cyborg's
constantly
birthday.
being,
Cyborg's birthday
So they
party.
show up, and Raven like goes nuts on this villain and makes him like relive his worst nightmare, and he just ends up like mind blanking.
Yeah.
So it's like another one of those things where Raven is just like, we're ending this now. And it's a really good issue. And at the end, Robin, again in character, says, "Oh, hey, Wally, you want me to mail that letter for you?" And Wally says, "Mail it. I'll deliver it in person," and shows him running across the river. So again, I mean, Robin would never say, "Why don't you run this across the country?" Robin would say, "I'll mail it for you." And
because he's a bro.
If you really pay attention to those kinds of things, there's tons of those in here, really well written. And then it goes right into that 4-part series about, they call it the Tales of the New Teen Titans, and it says number 1. So it must have been just a 4-issue miniseries that just came out on the side.
Yeah.
Which at that time was probably really good timing, because they just went like 16 issues without really, really telling the origin of the characters. And I'm sure
they gave them like blips and things like that, but it was like,
as a reader, you're like, I want to know.
Yeah, if you were attached to those characters, or there's a particular one that you want to know more backstory about, there you go. And you don't have to waste time during the actual story to do that.
Yeah,
because
it's
their standalone issues there.
It's kind of rare that you get a team book like this where you're not familiar with most of the characters. Like when they do a Justice League, they might introduce one new character in any particular run, but they're assuming you already know Batman and Green Lantern and Wonder Woman. They might introduce like the first time they introduce Martian Manhunter, or the first time they introduce this character, but you already know everyone else. And this is they're like, there's 3 brand new characters.
Yeah. And comics used to do this like reveal at the end page, because when you write a comic, it's sort of like you set the scene, you make a catalyst, you flip the page, and then like something happens, right? Like you don't usually have a reveal on the spread. You always have to have it on the flip.
Yeah.
So in old school comics, they'd always like end the issue with a character reveal
or a villain reveal.
Yeah, or something. And that's where you see like, oh, it's the first appearance of this guy. And it's not until the very last page, the last panel, last page, last panel.
Right.
Yep. So for this, just to say, here's the character, and hey, you know what? They're all gonna go fight now. And you're like, okay, let's see how this goes. Overall, this is my first jump into reading the Titans, Teen Titans. Really my first jump into this side era of DC, because I've read a lot in this time in DC, but the Teen Titans had always been kind of separate from everybody else. They rarely made an appearance into other issues. It was kind of the other. Yeah. They were their own thing.
Sure.
Because you could read Batman and everyone else in this era, and you won't see the Teen Titans in those comics. Because those comics didn't need a boost, maybe.
Sure.
But I'm really happy that it did turn out, and you're right. I mean, in the day, it was rivaling other team issues.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And teen issues. Team and
team. Wow. You see
it became like one of the best selling comics when.
Yeah. I think that was really hot for DC back in the day.
Yeah. And it showed that they have, DC, not to go off on a tangent, but DC has enough characters that they could put together teams till the end of time. Yep. They could just be like, you're on a team. Yep. And that's the thing that DC always had over some of the competitors, was they just had a tremendous amount of characters that were actually viable characters. You look at some other comic, like they came up with a lot of characters that were just throwaway characters. Like you're like, good, I'm never going to see that guy again. And DC always had really well developed characters, and then you hoped that they came back. So.
What did you guys think of the art style in this book? Let's talk about George Perez.
Dun dun dun. Go back.
I mean, I like it. Like I said, I haven't read a ton of like Bronze Age. This is actually probably the oldest comic I've read in terms of like a whole series. Most of the stuff I've read is from when I was a kid, late 90s, early 2000s onward.
Yes.
And compared to, I guess, other things that I've seen and not read in its entirety, like I think this is really good. Like there's a lot of good like facial expressions. It just really feels really human.
Yeah.
And like there's a lot of bright colors. I mean, their costumes are all very bright. And
Mhm.
it just feels like, I don't know. I feel like it's hard to strike a balance sometimes between making something feel fun and emotional and making you feel like a love for the characters, but also making sure that because it's a superhero comic, making sure that the bad guys and like the drama and the conflict is scary enough, or at least like dramatic enough that it's believable. Like, you know, is there a chance they could get hurt fighting
Yes.
this bad guy, or are they
Right.
just fighting Calendar Man?
And you didn't
know?
have to make it scary to be gory, like emotionally,
Right.
physically. You could do all those things.
Yeah, and I the only other thing I really know George Perez for is Wonder Woman.
Yep.
But I liked it more than I thought I would, because jumping into this, I was like, oh, this is kind of older than anything I've read. Like, is it going to feel hard to follow? But it wasn't for me.
Yeah. George Perez is one of the very infamous comic book artists that their style speaks for themselves. They're very detailed.
Mhm.
They do great facial expressions. They definitely give characters an identifiable look. But I guess besides all that, George Perez really did a good job of like, here's the Titans Tower. Here is the inside of the Titans Tower. I'll give you a blueprint of the place.
Yeah.
Here's where the toilet is.
There's
Things
literally
like
a
that.
map,
Like,
yeah.
there's literally a diagram of like where everything is. It really gives you a sense of place. And even like in like there was a mythology tie-in with the Wonder Girl and one of the arcs. And you definitely can see Tartarus. This is where the Titans came, like the Greek Titans came from. This is where the Greek mythology ones. See how different they are, how different the colors are, how different the aspects are. And here's what happens when the two forces clash against each other. And that was really cool to see. And yeah, he's very iconic. He would also go on to do Infinity Gauntlet. He did Wonder Woman, which was huge. And he just recently retired 2-3 years ago from the scene. So, yeah.
George Perez is one of those that are like probably the top 10 artists that people can name and they'd say, oh yeah, George Perez, he really holds his own for decades. And his drawing style to me is like quiet elegance, I guess is a good way to say it.
Okay.
Like it's detailed, but there aren't like people jumping off the page or like,
Right.
Or it's not super detailed.
Yeah,
like you
it's
can
not-
see like lines on their face,
Yeah.
but enough structure that you can tell their expressions. And
he made
from each other,
choices
yeah.
where if there was a shock that the team needed to look shocked, everyone had sort of that same look of shock, right?
Mhm.
And in some comics nowadays, they're using just sort of static screaming faces all the time where they're just like, oh, and it's like, or they're talking and they're screaming and talking.
Yes.
When people talk with George Perez, I don't know, their expression sort of matches what they're saying.
Yeah, their emotions.
And,
Yeah.
and it's really well done. In fact, you could tell spends a lot of time on how the page should lay out. You see a lot of the panels are overlapping the background images. You see a lot of panels sort of in a collage, like, some
Yeah.
faces are off in the
A
side.
lot of backgrounds.
He does
detail
that
in
a
the
lot with
backgrounds,
Wonder
yeah.
Woman because there's a lot of that mythology. So he always wants to work in like the Corinthian columns and the people's, scenery and like, just
Yeah.
how beautiful Themyscira is.
Mhm.
And in the Teen Titans, part of being a comic book artist is when you draw a character, you have to be able to pick up that character later on and people recognize who that is. So he drew women and girls like women and girls. He drew men like men, but no one's like crazy
Over
muscular
sexualized
and stuff.
or
Yeah.
over
Like
muscular.
Kid Flash is probably like, and Beast Boy and things. I mean, they're what you would think. They're athletic build. You know,
Yes.
it wasn't until much later that it got into the totally crazy, like chiseled every
Yeah.
ab. kind
Yeah,
of
until
thing.
the 90s happened.
Yeah.
Other than Robin's thighs. Robin does have very muscular thighs.
Well,
Wow.
that's why he shows them off. That's why he has to keep his costume.
But he's an acrobat, so honestly, it makes sense.
He jumps a lot. He
Yeah.
just jumps all the time.
Good legs. Good
But
strength.
you know, same idea. You know, you get this like he almost. You have to think about just how much he drew on a page, and he
Mhm.
must be flying through these pages and just be like, "Yep, that's it, that's it, that's it." You know, a lot of that is attributed to the inker, of course, but
Mhm.
yeah.
I think, you know, when he drew characters that were sad, like you picked up on that, you know. Here's a good example. Robin sometimes has no eyes with his
Mhm.
mask on. Then he has eyes with his mask. Then he has no mask.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he tries to think of what would these characters be wearing if they're going to a birthday party, or if they were going to college, or, you know, what is their attire? Because, you know, think about that. Like, what does Wally West wear when he's in his dorm?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so he's always thinking about everything that they can do to develop these characters and tell the story at the same time. George Perez is just awesome. I mean, you can't say enough about him. And he gave life to all of these characters, and there's a reason why their costumes haven't changed in years, because he got it right.
Yeah. And he's very passionate about the Teen Titans still. This was his favorite team book to work on, and he loved developing the costumes and the looks of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was watching some of his interviews, and he was like, he appreciated the uniqueness of communicating with Marv, and he didn't have to think of that, you know, they would last the 8 issues, and he realized those going places. And he would say that Wonder Woman was his personal triumph in the scene. You know, he got to kind of make her his own thing, and
Because he wrote and drew Wonder
that,
Woman.
and it was kind of pitched to him like, oh, it was a terrible pitch. And he's like, I can do a way better job of that. And so he pitched it at Len Wein, one of the editors at DC. Were like, yeah, I'll totally help you. And he did a great job.
If you ever want to find a George Perez art, just look for like really curly hair. It's like, that's his thing.
Yeah.
He knows how to do that.
But and then and bringing him to when he just retired recently, he said cosplaying brought him back to conventions after being in the scene for 30 plus years. He eventually did, you know, start to burn out, but then with the resurgence of cosplaying coming back in, he really appreciated people like cosplaying as his characters, and you know how much time they spent on him. So it's really cool that these characters such as the Teen Titans kind of got their own life because of him, and would continue on to see that legacy, and he really appreciated that. So
but overall, just like we do with every podcast, we encourage you to find the omnibus of the new Teen Titans. This is the omnibus number 1 of 6. Right?
Yeah, it's going to be 6
gonna be
and maybe beyond one day.
And it's about 700 pages. So there's a lot of Teen Titans out there. It's a great story to jump into. If you haven't read it before, take it from me. It's a great spot to get into DC Comics without jumping into like the big 3, and just see what DC can do.
Yep. If you like the cartoons, I would suggest, you know, picking this up if you want to know more.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what drew us to this Omni, is that it was, like you said, mapped out really well. I mean, the story reads really well all the way through, because an omnibus, like we've talked about before, really quick, an omnibus is per writer. So Marv Wolfman wrote all of this, so it's every issue in order.
Yep.
But if he only wrote like 10 of these, and then someone else wrote 5, and then he came back, that 5 would not be in the omnibus, which sometimes breaks the set a little bit and makes all these orphan issues. But a really clean running through all the way from start to finish, reading Omni, this is it.
Yeah, very well paced,
Very well done.
very compelling, and we definitely think you should pick this up. We had a great time reading it and can't wait to read more. So this is Andrew Bonner
And Chris Ramos.
And Benjamin Coakley.
signing off.